All right, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to another live stream. Uh, Joining me is the Executive Director of the USS Kidd Veterans Museum, Mr. Parks Stephenson. Parks, how are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And this is a dual live stream. We are live on my channel as well as the USS Kidd Veterans Museum. And I know Parks, we have a topic here that you are intimately familiar with, of course, USS Johnston.
Yeah, Johnston is the entire reason why I'm here at the Kid nowadays. Um, it's the one wreck that I've been to that got to me emotionally. I hadn't really, I've been on other wrecks, and I've had I've learned a lot from those wrecks. But I was always the data acquisition guy. My job was to go down and record detail, look for specific items, try to help with the overall knowledge of those wrecks. But Johnston was different. Got down there, and it unexpectedly hit me on an emotional level to the point where I literally quit my career as an aerospace engineer and moved my wife from Southern California to Louisiana to, finally take a little Fletcher class destroyer. So I got my own ship. This is not a Fletcher, by the way.
I see two funnels on there.
Yeah, it's a little Tootsie Toy from the 30s. And you would have seen Tom Hanks with this in the movie Greyhound, which starred USS Kidd as the main character.
Absolutely. Can you touch on that though a bit? What was it about the Johnston that resonated with you on that level?
I really don't know. I honestly don't know. I was not prepared for it.
Okay.
But if you want to get all metaphysical about it, it's it's just something that it reached out and touched me is the only thing I can explain. I've had experience with other wrecks, and of course Titanic is the most famous of them. And in interviews, television interviews about it, I'm always asked, what was it like to see Titanic for the first time? And I usually give a pretty bland answer because, again, I was the, I had eyes out, too busy looking for things to feel very emotional about it. And I had eyes out for Johnston too, but it just I didn't feel emotion until this wreck. So much so that as we finally started running out of battery power on our dive and had to go for the surface, I played the song "It's Been a Long, Long Time" by Harry James, and now whenever I hear that song, to me that's the Johnston song. As soon as I hear that song, it takes me right back there. A lot of people will associate it with the end of what was it, Avengers Endgame, I believe it was. But for me, it takes me back to Johnston.
Interesting. So with Kidd, you mentioned they kind of intertwined for you. The Johnston is what brought you to the Kidd, or was it the Kidd that brought you to the Johnston? How did that go?
Well, I mean, okay. So practically speaking, um, I guess I should back up a little bit. Um, in 2019, I I went down with Victor Vescovo on the Titanic wreck. He wanted to dive on Titanic. I was put forward as his guide, and we kind of bonded during the Titanic expedition. As then That was really a test for the deep sea submergence for the DSV limiting factor, deep submergence vessel limiting factor, which Victor had built by Triton submarines as a full ocean depth submersible. And originally the Titanic dive was meant to be a test for this. I mean, she'd already passed certification tests and trials and everything, but this was more of a real world exercise of the submersible in what the Triton crew called a shallow wreck. That blew my mind because I've always thought of Titanic as a very deep wreck at 3,800 meters. It's certainly nothing to sneeze at. But again, limiting factor was a full ocean depth submersible designed to go down to Challenger Deep, which is 11,000 meters. And so Victor had it built because he had climbed the tallest mountains in the world, and then now he wanted to dive the deepest deeps. So he identified what he called the 5 deeps in the world, oceans, and wanted to hit all 5 deeps in this thing. We had originally went out in 2018, but it was a bit late in the season. It was October of 2018 when we first went out to the Titanic wreck site, and the sea state was a little bit too high to dive. So we ended up scrubbing that expedition. Victor said, "Oh, not everybody was disappointed." Victor said, "No problem. We'll come back next year." And he actually started his 5 deeps diving and hit Titanic on the way from one of the 5 deeps dives. So true to his word, he gave those of us that assembled in 2018 for the Titanic expedition a Titanic expedition. Afterwards, he continued to take limiting factor around with him as he started to hit some of the lesser known deeps around the world. And he was asking, and I think he got a little bit of the wreck exploration bug with Titanic. The limiting factor was not designed as a wreck exploration vehicle. It's literally designed to go as deep as it can go and then come back, look around a little bit and come back up. But he would ask me, "Okay, I'm going to be going here. What wrecks can I possibly look at?" And he went to the Mediterranean, not specifically so deep in the Mediterranean, but there was a French sub there that he dived on. That they were able to find. I forget the name off the top of my head right now. But then he said, "I'll be going in the Philippine Sea. There's the Emden Deep there. Are there any wrecks there?" And I said, "Well, yes, there is. There's the Battle off Samar from October 25th, 1944. And we're talking in late 2019 now. And in October of 2019, Paul Allen's group, Vulcan Incorporated, had and they've been going around the world, and in the research ship Petrel, they deployed ROVs and have explored wrecks all around the world. The wrecks off Guadalcanal and Iron Bottom Sound, the wreck of Musashi,
Wow.
several other wrecks, but they were in the Philippine Sea and they came across a debris field, which they identified that as a Fletcher class destroyer, and they thought it was Johnston, but they weren't exactly sure. And one of the things that threw them all, there were 2 Fletcher class destroyers that sank the day of the Battle off Samar, the USS Johnston and the USS Hull, both sister ships. And there was they came across a mount captain's hood that fit on top of the 5-inch guns. And in this picture of Johnston here, you don't see any of those hoods on any of her 5-inch guns. Now, if you had a picture of Hull during that, there are pictures of Hull, and she's got the hoods on several of her mounts. So they thought, well, it could be Hull, could be Johnston. They weren't sure. I looked at the imagery, And one thing that stood out to me, the remains of there were little torn, mangled pieces scattered in this debris field. But there were a couple of large pieces. A couple of them turned out to be gun mounts. Actually, three of them did. Two were obvious. One was obviously Mount 53. The 5-inch gun mounts on the Fletcher class destroyer are numbered 1 through 5. And because it's 5-inch, it picks up a 5. So 51, 52, 53, 54, 55 from bow to stern. One of the mounts was obviously Mount 53 because it had the torpedo loading crane and the walkway right there next to the mount. Another what appeared to be a gun mount was blown apart. It was upside down. It was a deck house, and which is houses the upper handling room in a Fletcher class destroyer, and then the mount was in the mud, and you could see the barrel. And I looked at that, and I talked to. By this time, I was starting to have discussions with some Fletcher class experts, including Tim Nesmith at the USS Kidd Veterans Museum. And on this mount, there was a particular beam that had a unique shape with it, which could only be found under Mount 54. So it's an internal thing. You won't see it in any of the photos here. And with that identity as Mount 54, I looked down at the gun barrel in the mud, and it was intact. And we know from survivor testimonies on Hull that during the battle, a Japanese shell had hit her gun barrel and torn it in half. And this was intact. And so therefore, it had to be Johnston. There were other indicators too. There were some surviving pieces of metal that were painted in 5N navy blue. And Johnston, that was what she was painted in. Hull, on the other hand, was painted in what we call dazzle camouflage, which is mostly light gray and black, and no 5N navy blue. So I was pretty sure we were on the trail of Johnston. So in May of 2020, during the height of the COVID pandemic, Victor and I flew to Dallas, and that was a fun day because, again, this is the height of the COVID pandemic. Everything's shut down. There are some flights going. I flew into Dallas, and I had to spend the night before we would head out toward Baton Rouge the next morning in Victor's helicopter. I got to spend the entire day and night in Dealey Plaza by myself. Wow. Nobody there at all, no cars, no people, no nothing. The 6th floor library, of course, was closed. Everything was closed around it, but I had the plaza for myself. So I'm sitting there looking at gun sight angles and this, that, and the other thing. And I became convinced that there's no shooter on Grassy Knoll because part of the colonnade obscures the shooter's vision. I mean, he would have to fire right as the limousine popped out from behind that colonnade and hit Kennedy, and it just didn't seem very feasible. But again, like I said, I was walking through all the potential trajectories and gun sight lines and everything. And it took a ton of pictures. So having all those is like having like a little reference library without people mucking up the scenes and whatever. And I could stand on the X marked in the road and spend as much time as I wanted there, looking up at the window, looking at various different potential trajectories without any cars, running me down. Anyway, Victor and I flew out to Baton Rouge. The museum was closed because of COVID, but the staff, Roseanne Geip was executive director at the time. Tim was there. Nate Bergeron was there, and they opened up Kidd to Victor and I so that we could study her. having seen this debris field, and this is a very early picture of Kidd back when she had black smokestack tops, which
Yeah.
is not appropriate. But anyway, we studied Kidd. So practically speaking, I went to Kidd first, and then would later go out on an expedition and find Johnston. But it was Johnston that led me to Kidd. So there was the reason for me going to Kidd was Johnston. So, however you want to word that, that was a sequence of events. But I had no idea at the time that I would be coming back here to take that museum. Roseanne was my predecessor. I would take the job from her. So there you go.
So I would imagine you go to Kidd and study Kidd. That way, it's easier for you to identify what you're seeing on the seafloor for Johnston.
Well, yeah, like I said, the debris field that Vulcan had found, it was just bits and pieces, torn pieces. There wasn't much intact. And it all seemed to come from the stern area, although the mast was out there and it was bent in like an L shape. There didn't seem to be much that I could tell from the forward part. It all seemed to come from back aft. And I would eventually do full-on analysis of the Vulcan footage and identify just about everything that they found, including the shards of deck. And but this wouldn't until we found the rest of the wreck later on. Like I said, we flew out to Kidd in May of 2020. We would go out to the Philippine Sea and dive on Johnston in March of 2021. And when we found her, she was the deepest shipwreck ever found at about 6,500 meters. But then the year later, we'd go back there after being turned away from Midway by NOAA, and we would find Samar B. Roberts, and she was 400 meters deeper and very close, only about 400 meters away. And so now Sammy B has taken the deepest shipwreck title away from Johnston.
And for clarification, you were on the dive that discovered Johnston, but not on the dive that discovered Sammy B. Do I have that right?
Yes. I went for Johnston. I went down in the first dive, and we looked around and didn't find anything. So for the next dive, so the inside of the limiting factor, it's very tight. There's 2 seats in there. It's a spherical pressure hull, and everything is within that pressure hull, including spare oxygen bottles that are ranged above you, the electrical panels, batteries, and everything behind you. Then you've got each seat has a porthole, a viewport in front of it, and it's mounted low. And then there's one viewport between us looking straight down. And again, this is because limiting factor is designed to go to the deepest part of the ocean, and you're basically looking down the whole time. It's not really set up for wreck exploration where you would like to be looking straight out. And it was very cramped in there. I liken it to being in coach in an airliner, but without the leg room. I've got my legs wrapped up underneath me and insulated booties on, because even with 2 heaters aboard, your extremities do not get the heat. And if you're not wearing insulated booties, you're going to get frostbite just sitting there.
Wow.
Why did I mention that? You asked you asked something, but that sent me off down that rabbit hole. But blah, blah, blah. Okay. Oh, I know why. So the first dive, I felt really cramped in there, and it's you know, it's like 8 hours underwater for the entire dive, and so I thought I would go on a crash diet and lose some weight. That did not work out. On the at the end of that dive, I couldn't get out of the submersible, and they had to send 3 guys in to get me out of the submersible and back on the deck of the pressure drop, the support ship. I was taken off the dive schedule. One of the guys from Triton Submarines was put in the observer's seat in my place. On the second dive, limiting factor went down. As soon as she hit the bottom, they had a malfunction. All of the ascent weights ejected, and limiting factor came right back up to the surface. So then they did dive 3, same crew. And they looked and they looked and they looked and they looked, and finally they found the debris field that Petrel had explored back in May of 2019. We didn't know where it was. Explorers don't often share the locations of their finds. I think Vulcan had reported the location of the U.S. Navy, but made it very clear that if they shared it with anybody else, they could get sued. So we had to re-find the Vulcan debris field, and from there range out and try to find what was missing. And we didn't know what we would find. And that's why I wanted to go to the Kidd, because as far as I knew, the rest of the ship was going to be torn apart as this debris field that we saw. And so I had to be prepared to be able to identify what could have been a torn apart, completely torn apart wreck. But in this third dive, Victor came across what we had identified as the emergency steering room of the Johnston from the Vulcan debris field, and from there found something that Vulcan had found in 2019, and that was a downward slope with a big track, like something heavy had slid down that slope. And so Victor followed that slope down about 400 meters. Again, it seems to be a constant number here. And the bow of the Johnston came out of the darkness right at the end of the dive. Their batteries were starting to fail, and they saw this, bow come up, and he got the 557 on the starboard bow, and everybody got excited. But Victor felt, and of course I started eating again, and I worked out, and I got back up, and Victor felt that I needed to be part of this. So the last dive, the one to survey the wreck, I went down on that, and we spent, the entire dive just surveying the wreck. It's not easy to find these wrecks in the deep ocean. I'd like to say that, I'm the one that developed the search plan, and I'd like to say that that my historical accuracy was on point, but really it was a miracle that we found Johnston. When after finding Johnston on the third dive, it took Victor an hour in the fourth dive to find her again. And we found her. We found her from a completely different direction. We couldn't find the debris field again. So we couldn't find the slope down. So Victor had to range out into to the east of it and come back up. Johnston had landed on the western edge of the a trench that in the Philippine Sea that includes the Emden Deep, and so
she could have actually went a whole lot deeper.
Oh yeah, she could have gone into the trench.
Wow.
which, by the way, is where I think Hole is. So if we ever go after Hole, I suspect we might find her as much as 9,000 to 10,000 meters down, which would definitely make her the deepest shipwreck, or Gambier Bay,
Mhm.
or Chickamauga. So
Wow.
they all went down in that general area. So we might find them in the trench. We'll see. But we came from deeper upslope and found Johnston on my dive. Found Johnston that way. And so yeah.
So you mentioned you found her and then you had to go back and find her again. And so it's not a
Mhm.
situation like where you find it, you don't essentially say, hey, these are the coordinates, like you send it up to, I guess, the mothership, for lack of a better word.
Mhm. No, we had the coordinates, and this just illustrates how difficult it is to find a wreck in the deep ocean. The next year with Sammy B. Roberts, we never tried to find Sammy B because a ship that small, and she's a destroyer escort, so she's smaller than Johnston.
Yeah.
The chances of finding her were astronomical. We were going after Gambier Bay. Now, Gambier Bay was a carrier. She was a baby carrier, but she's still a carrier, biggest target. And so we were going after her because the chances of finding her were a little bit better. And we ended up stumbling across Sammy B, where I thought Gambier Bay was. And Gambier Bay may still be there. I mean, it's amazing how big the ocean is and how it swallows up these wrecks. They are
Right.
not easy to find. So you don't see a wreck like that on any sonar. Well, I'm going to take that back, because in 2020 something, Vulcan discovered Indianapolis, but I'd actually seen Indianapolis a couple of years earlier on a scan that was provided to me, and I was asked to identify it, and it was Indianapolis, except she was missing her bow, and they tried to get an expedition for it, but it was $4 million was too much at that time for a sponsor, so we never did go after it. And then Vulcan would find her later. And I never saw the bow. They found the bow too, but all I saw was the main hull with the bow missing. But and even then, it was just a little anomaly in a much larger side scan sonar display. And it helped that we knew that area was where Indianapolis went down, but and it took a while of staring at it and looking at trying different enhancement techniques to finally get a profile out of the anomaly that matched a cruiser. So it's not easy. We never saw Johnston on any surface-based sonar. It's just too small a target to break out, even on a plane. I've seen a Kagi on sonar, and
Wow.
that's a full-on aircraft carrier,
Mhm.
missing the flight deck, but still the whole bow of a Kagi, and she's on a featureless plane, so there's no interference to the sonar around it. She's just a big anomaly in
Right.
in a flat plane. But even then, it was like 2 pixels worth of information in a sonar display. So people think that you can just go down and find these things. It's not that easy. We actually beat the odds finding Johnston and Samuel B. Roberts. And like I said, the only reason why we found Sammy B is we were looking for Gambier Bay, and we stumbled across the triple torpedo tubes of Sammy B. Roberts. I developed a search pattern based on where I thought Gambier Bay was, and a guy, one of the Titan crew, Tim McDonald, was piloting the submersible that day because Victor had already dived, and he called back to the surface and said, "Oh, I'd like some more time." And comms with the surface, they're acoustic comms, they don't really facilitate long conversations, so they're very cryptic. And he said, "I need more time." And then he said later, after a little bit, "I need more time." And so, "Okay, what you got there, Tim?" And finally, he came back to the surface and was showing me these pictures of things he came across. He came across a regulator for an oxygen breathing apparatus. Ooh, good. We got a U.S. Navy ship down here. This is U.S. Navy equipment. Then he came across a helmet bail. Okay, yeah, there's a Navy ship somewhere around here. And then he showed me a picture, and it's 3 torpedo tubes sticking up out of the ocean floor. I go, oh, "That's Sammy B." and so the next day, Victor piloted the sub and followed us a very, very light debris trail to a big rock. And Sammy B had nosed into that rock and then settled down over the rock and broke her back on the rock. And on sonar, she looked like a rock. If we hadn't have found those little telltales and led to it, and he'd seen it optically with his camera, it would have looked like a rock formation on sonar. So it's really, really difficult to find these wrecks. And then, of course, we spent the rest of that expedition trying to find Gambier Bay. We actually even went down the side of the trench looking for some kind of anything, any slide trails, any debris or anything like that, and just didn't find anything. So it's you can do your best. We spent a lot of time recreating the battle. I worked with a guy named Lundgren, who had written a book called The World Wondered. And he had done a very thorough recalculation of the battle, the movement of the battle. And I worked with him, and Rob and I basically fine-tuned his earlier work, and it put us in the ballpark, but ultimately came down to me putting my finger on the map and saying, "Here is where I think we should dive." And 3 dives later, we were lucky with Johnston.
Right. We do have one question in the chat I wanted to show you real quick. In comparison to limiting factor, is that smaller than the mirror subs? Do you know?
Yes, it is.
It is. Okay.
Yeah. And when you compare the sizes, you talk about the pressure hulls, because these submersibles are surrounded by fairings to house various things that don't need to be pressurized. And the mirrors are bigger than the limiting factor in both the total size of the submersible, including the fairings, and also the pressure hull. But the mirrors weren't designed to go as deep as limiting factor was. So yeah, limiting factor was as big as it could be for the depths it was intended to go down to. And she's been a successful submersible. She's made, before limiting factor came along, more men had been to the moon than had been at the bottom of Challenger Deep, and that's no longer true. Victor has taken a number of people down to Challenger Deep in the limiting factor.
Is that the one that Cameron went down to Challenger Deep in? Do you know?
No, I mean, yeah, I do know. Jim had a vehicle built called the Deep Sea Challenger that he did his dive in, and that's now in a museum in Australia, I believe. But the mirrors are also museum pieces now too. they've been taken out of service, and I lost track of them. I think they're both museum pieces, or one is. They're not diving anymore.
Gotcha.
Limiting factor is now Victor had to sell it and the support ship because it's very expensive to logistically to maintain such a system. So he sold it to a concern called Inkfish, and they've been using limiting factor to go explore geological formations to get a better understanding of the ocean floor, and to do a bit more mapping, because that's one thing that's sorely needed, is to map the ocean bottom. But I have heard that recently Inkfish is starting to get interested in some wreck exploration. So we'll see what happens.
Okay. Yeah, Mark here saying I think Jim designed his submersible.
Well, I'm sure he had a hand in it, but just like Victor did not fully design. Let me put it this way: when you're working with systems like this, and I'm going to put my engineer hat on now, you develop requirements. You want the sub to do this, and this. Then you hand it over to someone to do the design that meets those requirements, and then builds to those requirements, and then tests to those requirements. So I don't have the full story on Deep Sea Challenger, but I think it's fairly safe to say that Jim was heavily involved in developing the requirements for the submersible, just like Victor was working with Triton to develop the requirements for the limiting factor. So, yeah.
Gotcha. We did have one other question. You may or may not know this one. This one might be a Tim question, but I'll show it to you anyway. And it wants to know, did any of the Fletcher class destroyers have a chicken painted on the gun mount by any chance? I don't know.
I don't know about a chicken, but one of the, there's 4 surviving Fletcher class destroyers. 3 of them are in the United States. 1 of them is in Greece. And the one in Boston, USS Cassin Young, had a rooster. That was their emblem. It was a fighting cock tearing apart a Japanese flag, rising sun flag. And that was painted on their smokestack, just like Kidd has a pirate painted on her smokestack. Oops. Hold on a second. Let me silence my phone here. If you go to the Cassin Young today, you'll see that emblem. It's not on a smokestack anymore, but they have it on signage as you go aboard the ship. It's a little sanitized. The rooster is no longer tearing apart a Japanese flag. It's just on a piece of white.
Right.
So I don't recall anything about a chicken, but definitely Cassin Young had a rooster as her. I even designed a flag for her on the 80th anniversary of the Fletchers. Each of us flew each other's flags, and the Sullivans in Buffalo, New York, they have the shamrock that was painted on their stack, so they had a shamrock flag. Of course, with Kidd, we have the pirate flag that you see here, and then for the and then of course the one in Greece, we just used a Greek national flag, the Velos, and then for Cassin Young, I just did the rooster emblem for him on a blue field.
Right.
Not an official flag, but it served the purpose.
Right. How much do you know about Johnston's service history and the Battle off Samar in particular?
A little bit. I mean,
So,
I got as intimately familiar with it as I could, because I was going down to the wreck and I wanted to understand what happened. And I actually, it's through understanding what happened and then to see the wreck itself. So what we found, let's just set the stage here. What we found of the wreck was the forward 2/3 of the ship, essentially. She had her funnels her funnels were torn off, her mast was torn off, and that was found in Vulcan's debris field. But literally from about where Mount 53 was forward was all intact, and she sat upright, and you could see the scars of the battle. Perfectly preserved. When you get that deep, there's no oxygen. There's little corrosion. Most of the damage that we saw to the wreck happened during the battle. It became very obvious, and when I did the analysis later, I found that there were two places where depth charges had been, that evidently the depth charges had detonated at depth. They shouldn't have, but they did, and blew the stern to pieces. But this was after the stern had already separated, because during the battle, Johnston would be hit by 18-inch shells that severely damaged her during the battle. But as she sank, and the hydrodynamic forces worked on her, it would tear the stern off of the forward portion of the vessel. And then once the stern was torn away, okay, so that one, move your little hand straight up, straight up, straight up. Right about, okay, now to the left. Okay, that's Mount 53. Right forward, right there, forward of Mount 53 is where the Johnston wreck was torn in two. So everything aft was torn apart to pieces. And then everything forward is still there, except for, like I said, the funnels and the mast were torn off on the way down and ended up in Vulcan's debris field. But so that's what we were looking at on the bottom. And what was very interesting to me was knowing the survivor accounts and being able to match the survivor accounts with what I was seeing on the wreck itself. And this is where the emotional part comes in, because there were two spots on the wreck in particular where I knew that something had happened there. I mean, I knew what had happened there. One was on the forward starboard side. It's the hatch leading into the officer's wardroom, and it's up in the forward superstructure. And during the battle, during wartime, in the Fletcher class destroyers, the wardroom, the officer's wardroom, doubled as the ship's surgery. You know, the ship's sick bay was not equipped to handle battle casualties. So the officer's wardroom was set aside as the ship's surgery, and the enlisted head, which is underneath Mount 53, 54, back in that area, it was the triage station. Anyway, a shell, I knew from the survivor accounts that as Johnston was sinking and she was surrounded by Japan and she was immobilized, a shell from Congo had taken out her remaining engine. She was dead in the water. She was sinking. They were abandoning ship, and the ship's doctor, Doc Brown, was helping wounded out of the wardroom over the rail into the water. And one of the other officers who knew Doc Brown saw him turn and go back into the wardroom, and a Japanese shell went right through the door of the wardroom and just blew the wardroom apart. There was another area on the port side, midships, where the 40 millimeter mounts were on elevated pedestals, and there was a breezeway underneath these pedestals on the main deck. On the port side, a group of sailors who basically their battle stations had been destroyed, and so they were just kind of huddled there because it seemed to offer shelter. A Japanese shell went right through the pedestal, through what was the ammunition room for the 40 millimeter and exploded amongst them. Now, when I was on the dive looking at these areas and knowing that these had happened there, I was trying to pay close attention to this so I could see details, but I could not see details. It was all dark. It was like some cloud over those areas. I could not see detail. And I was looking with my eyeballs, trying very hard to see through this cloud of black to see what I could see. And the interesting thing is, when I got back to the surface and looked at the digital imagery, there was no cloud of black there. You could see everything, but I could not see it with my eyeball. It wasn't a lighting problem. It was when the lights, the submersible aimed right at it, I just couldn't see through this black gloom. But in the digital imagery, black gloom's not there. And you could see the wardroom was eviscerated, and you could see the hole that the Japanese shell made in the 40 millimeter pedestal in the ammunition room that went in and exploded among these guys. And you could see the area, but there's no bodies. I've never seen a human body at a shipwreck, any shipwreck. So I always thought that was strange, and maybe part of that whole emotional component acting on my brain or whatever. So yes, going back to what did I know about it? Very lucky that so Johnston and Hull were sister ships, and so it was natural for the Johnston survivors and the Hull survivors to come together in one association called the Johnston Hull Survivors Association. And luckily, in the early 1990s, when a lot of them were still alive, the association made all the survivors write down what they could remember about the battle and tell their stories. So the association had that collection of stories, and I had access to that and read it and memorized it and got to know these guys and what they saw and when they saw and all of that. So that was all. That not only helped me reconstruct the events of the battle, but once I got the ship in front of me and saw the damage that I could tie into what the survivors said they saw, I actually learned more about what happened during the battle than what the histories that were written after the ship disappeared from the surface could tell. In Johnston's case, I actually learned more about what happened during the battle from the wreck. It's like in Titanic, when we found the Marconi wireless had been deliberately turned off. We could see the settings on the Marconi wireless. We could essentially recreate the last actions of the wireless operators aboard Titanic because the equipment was still intact and we could see them in their final settings and all like that. So the wreck telling those last stories. I always say about these shipwrecks, oftentimes they're the last existing survivors of the event, of the battle, of the disaster, or whatever, and they still have stories that they can tell us. Absolutely. So where do you want me to start with? Do you want me to go through the history of the battle of Johnston?
Yeah, absolutely. But before you do, we have another question in the chat. Is the depth charge magazine beneath the fantail racks?
Well, there isn't a depth charge magazine per se. They a lot of times, in Johnston's case, they held a lot of their excess depth charges in aft berthing. You'd sleep with the depth charges. Okay. Most of the depth charges were held. Okay, so depth charges were held in multiple spots. There are the K guns that are on either side of the after deck house. There's 3 K gun launchers on either side, and they have racks next to them that hold a certain number of depth charges. Then there's the tracks on the stern that you always see in the movies. There's two of them, where they roll. You let them roll, and they roll down the track into the water, and they explode in the wake of the ship. And then there are some extra storage. Yeah, there we go. So you can see on either side there's the racks. We don't have any depth charges in them because and all of these have been moved. They all had to be cut loose because that whole fantail was cut out and rebuilt. But the tracks are on outboard on either side, and they actually are farther aft and actually stick out over the stern. But for in preparation for towing her home, we bring them inboard because the tow boats will damage them. And then there's inboard of those two kind of angled racks there. Those are storage racks. Now during the battle, knowing that they could sink, the order was given to jettison all of the depth charges. They weren't going to be in a situation where they needed them. They did. There's a big fear that if Johnston sank, the depth charges would explode in the water and kill men in the water, and it's been known to happen. So they jettisoned all the ones they could, and then for the ones in the storage racks or the ones down in aft berthing, they didn't have time to get them to be prepared to be launched or jettisoned, so they ensured that all of them were safed. They a crewman. There's multiple survivor accounts saying everything that I just told you, that they jettisoned what they could, and they checked and double checked that the depth charges were unsafe. But Johnston sank so deep that something happened to two of her depth charges that could not be jettisoned. One was back here on the fantail. That one exploded right above the emergency steering room. The scuttle for the emergency steering room is a short little can-shaped thing there with a wheel on top of it. That and that's where Commander Evans of Johnston would be commanding the ship from later in the battle. He would be standing over that little scuttle trying to drive the ship from back here, shouting commands down. The emergency steering room was no, not that one. Go up to the right and over that. That's the scuttle for the emergency steering room. Okay. We found the emergency steering room literally pushed down through the bottom of the vessel to land on the ocean floor. So right about there where your cursor is, that storage rack right next to it, one of those depth charges went off. The other depth charge that went off was up forward near the K-gun racks. On the port side, about where Kidd was hit by some of Yamato's 18-inch shells. I think we'll see it here in a second. I haven't seen this drone shot. Is this your drone?
Yes.
Okay, I haven't seen this, so
yeah, it's gonna move forward.
Okay. So
they're coming into view now. The K-gun racks.
Yeah, over on the port side. Which side are you going to go up, or are you going to go over the top?
It's going to go straight and then go up over the funnels.
Over the top. Okay.
Yeah.
So down below on port, to the left there is where the other depth charge went off and just totally blew all of that to pieces. Anyway, so Johnston was launched in October of 1943. Commander Evans, Ernst Evans, was the skipper. He had been aboard a destroyer. Yeah, there he is. There's my man, Chief.
Chief.
Yeah, Native American from Oklahoma. And he had been aboard a destroyer in the South Pacific when the war broke out. And he was part of the ABCD group that tried to stop the Japanese advance. And of course, they didn't. They were supposed to protect the British ships, the Repulse and Prince of Wales, and were unable to keep the Japanese from sinking both of those. And anyway, his ship, the Alden, basically had to retreat. And for a junior officer like Evans, who had come up, he joined the Navy, got a Naval Academy appointment, basically worked his way up the chain of command. It was something that stuck with him. The retreat like that. He was shamed by it, and made a vow that if he ever got his own fighting ship, he would take it into harm's way. I mean, he said it in those words at the commissioning ceremonies for Johnston.
I actually have his quote in front of me.
Yeah.
He said, "This is going to be a fighting ship. I intend to go in harm's way, and anyone who doesn't want to go along had better get off right now."
Correct. And nobody did. Well, I mean, yeah, there was one bosun's mate bosun's chief that didn't make it, but a year later, I mean, Johnston was literally a couple of days from her 1-year birthday when she would be sunk. They would see action in the Pacific, several battles, so the crew got some battle experience, but the two battle experienced officers aboard were Commander Evans, who saw action in the early year of the war, and then his gunnery officer, Lieutenant Robert Hagen, who almost lost his life off of Guadalcanal a year earlier, and actually, Lieutenant Hagen's son is my best friend here in Baton Rouge. And
wow!
I'm going to write a book about Johnston, and Rob Hagen is going to be my co-author. In fact, I'm going to meet him tomorrow, and I'm going to record everything he says about his dad. I've already learned a lot about his dad that actually helped change the history a bit. Some of what you'll read in the books about Johnston's actions are not true. They're based on Hagen's comments after the battle, but Hagen would later retract some of them in later interviews. So that's kind of interesting. But anyway, Johnston was yeah, go ahead.
Quick question. I'm sorry. Is it true that she got the nickname GQ Johnny because she was always at general quarters, pretty much?
Yes, but Evans wasn't a guy for those, for that kind of thing. The ships picked up nicknames. I also think, Johnston was in her 1943, all 5N navy blue. Kidd would be painted the same way coming out of the yards, but at her first shipyard period, they would paint her in the dazzle camouflage, which Kidd is painted in now, and then she would be painted again in 1945. But Evans, they don't always have say on when their ship gets painted, but Evans was a no-nonsense person, and I think that he might have had a hand in keeping Johnston in her 1943 paint as late as the Battle off Samar in October of 44. But Kidd here is in her 44 dazzle camouflage, kind of similar to Hull's, different pattern, but Hull would have looked kind of like Kidd looks now.
Okay.
So different pattern, slightly different pattern. You have 175 Fletchers. Once the enemy knows the capabilities of one, they can predict what they're going to deal with the other 174. So the Fletchers were painted in different versions of this dazzle camouflage for various reasons, including to break up the class so that the enemy would never be completely certain about what they were facing. Is my supposition. I'm guessing on that. I haven't seen that written anywhere, but it makes sense to me.
Okay.
Okay, so that's 52. Flying over 52 there, coming up on the bridge. This is very close to Johnston. When I give tours of the Kidd, I give tours for both ships, both Kidd and Johnston, and I talk about both. And if I get enough money, I do want to film a 10-minute short for the museum, an immersive film that will put you first on Johnston at the Battle off Samar and go through the high beats of that battle. And then you get sunk and you go in the water for 53 hours. Then you get rescued, you go on survivor's leave, and then you get assigned to a ship then in the yards. And in the case of this 10-minute short, it'll be aboard the Kidd, and you'll go off to Okinawa and you get hit by the kamikaze. So basically, you'll get the full experience of a Fletcher in action by combining the Johnston and the Kidd battle diaries together. So anyway, we get to October 20th, 1944, and General MacArthur is returning to the Philippines. And he's going ashore to take back the Philippine Islands from the Japanese. And his invasion fleet is landing in Leyte Gulf. It's very interesting. There's a division between Army assets and Navy assets. Everybody that was supporting MacArthur are considered Army assets. So 7th Fleet is assigned to protect the beachhead, and they're under MacArthur's command. Meanwhile, 3rd Fleet, which includes Halsey's carrier force, is reporting back to Nimitz as a Navy command. Nimitz is back in Hawaii. MacArthur is local, and Nimitz is back in Hawaii. Interesting division of chain of command, which would kind of play out later, because communications would get kind of delayed on things. The Japanese wanted to counter the Americans taking back the Philippines, so they came up with a plan where they would split their their carrier force had been largely decimated. This is following the Battle of the Philippine Sea, which basically signaled the end of the Japanese naval air threat on a large scale. But they still had a very formidable surface action fleet, including the 2 largest battleships that have ever been built and ever will be built, the sister ships Yamato and Musashi. The Japanese split their forces. Well, a lot of the Japanese surface fleet was down in the south, like in Indonesia, Surabaya, where fuel was. The remnants of the carrier force was up in the home islands of Japan. So in their plan, they were going to sortie the surface ships from down south into 2 groups. There was a southern group and a center group. And then Admiral Ozawa would take the carriers in the northern group, and they had carriers. They didn't have any trained crews to fly any airplanes. So they were going to be a decoy group. They knew that Admiral Halsey loved to kill carriers. So they were going to dangle this bait in front of Halsey and lure him away to deprive a significant amount of air power from the American landing force. So on the 24th of October, 1944, the Japanese got close. The southern group came up through the Surigao Strait, a bunch of islands down in the Pacific archipelago, or whatever you call a group of islands. and they made a run in, which was doomed to disaster. The battleships of the Seventh Fleet and a lot of these battleships had been raised from Pearl Harbor. They were definitely wanting some blood. They did a classic crossing the T maneuver. As the Japanese came up and being hit on all sides by PT boats and Fletcher-class destroyers, you had the battleships crossing the T and just decimating the Southern force coming up. Meanwhile, MacArthur had landed 4 days before, and they were in the process of working their way inland, setting up their first airfields, trying to get some land-based air power going, bringing in logistics to feed the invasion force and everything, restock with ammo, whatever, and there were some support units that put themselves off the island of Samar, well away from the battle area, but close enough to run close air support missions ashore, and also to look out for submarine activity, any of the threats that might come in. So you could kind of consider it a backwater force. The center force, the Japanese center force, came up through the Sibuyan Sea the day before. This is on the 24th. And Halsey's Third Fleet aviators would see them, and they would attack. And they wrought some considerable damage on the center force. They sank battleship Musashi, and the commander of the center force, Admiral Kurata, he had his ship shot out from underneath him, and he ended up in the water. He would be fished out of the water and brought aboard Yamato and would run the next day's events from Yamato. But his cruiser force was severely depleted, and he lost one of his major battleships. But still, center force was truly a formidable force. And they started the night of the and Halsey's force, when Musashi was sunk and Atago was sunk and others were damaged and had to start a retreat, Halsey's aviators noticed this and saw the center force turn around. So they considered the center force repelled. They weren't destroyed like the southern force was, but they were obviously turning around and retreating. So Halsey kind of dismissed them as a threat. That evening, he started to get glimpses of Ozawa's decoy force up in the north. So he took all of Third Fleet and went after him. And he left the area around off Samar completely unguarded. This is why in Hunt for Red October, Sean Connery says Halsey was stupid. He took the bait. Yeah. And what he didn't see was once Kurata got himself together again, he turned center force back around and came through a pass between the islands called the San Bernardino Strait. And they would start to emerge from the strait in the early morning hours of the 25th of October. Nobody knew they were there. These support units, there were three of them. And their call signs were Taffies. You had Taffy 1, 2, Taffy 3. Taffy 3 was the one most northern and closest to the San Bernardino Strait outlet, where Kurata's force was going to come plowing out. And they started their early morning launches. The first ones off the deck were basically patrol aircraft looking for submarine activity. And one of the pilots called in and said, "Oh shit, I've got the biggest battleship I've ever seen, flying the biggest meatball flag I've ever seen, coming down on you." And Admiral Ziggy Sprague, who was in command of Taffy 3, thought the pilot had seen Halsey's force and didn't. It just was so unbelievable that he just couldn't accept it. So he asked the pilot for verification, and at this point, the anti-air gunners on Yamato and some of the ships around Yamato started opening up on the pilot, and they also started firing on the task unit, and that's when Sprague went, "Oh no, I've got." He estimated, once he realized what he was up against, he figured that he had 15 minutes to live before his force was annihilated. It was just so overwhelming. I mean, you had 4 battleships of the Congo class. You have Yamato. You have, 6 cruisers, 11 destroyers, 2 light cruisers. I mean, it was a massive force. And they were coming out of the strait. Now, on the Japanese side, they saw these flat tops, and the Japanese didn't know that we had these CVEs, Jeep carriers, baby carriers, whatever you call them. They're basically merchant ships with a flight deck put on them, and they had a small air wing, Grumman Avengers, Wildcats, things like that. And but the Japanese didn't know about that. So when they saw the carrier shape, they thought that they had caught Halsey's carrier fleet by surprise. And they knew that Halsey, they'd already taken a beating from Halsey the day before. Oh, crap, we're going to get another beating. But it didn't appear that the carriers were launching aircraft just yet. So Kurita basically said, we need to take them out before they get their flight operations going. So he just gave everybody, go get them, fire at will. And so the fast cruisers took off, and the destroyers went out to the west to kind of get a torpedo solution out toward the west. And everybody was just going hell-bent, no real attack plan. What's your plan of attack? To attack. That was basically their attack at that point. And then Sprague sees this and goes, "Oh crap!" And so he turns Taffy 3 into winds, launch everything. And they were launching aircraft with no fuel. They were launching aircraft with no weapons. I remember the one aircraft that got off with the appropriate weapons to go up against the Japanese surface fleet had no gas, and he was never heard from again. And you had American aviators doing attack runs at these ships with no weapons, just trying to distract the Japanese gunners, do whatever they could to slow things down, try to get trying to figure out what they were going to do. Meanwhile, Sprague is calling for help. Word gets back to Nimitz. Nimitz knew that Halsey had gone after the decoy fleet. Didn't know it was a decoy fleet, but he knew that Halsey had some carriers he's going after. But Halsey had said that he was going to leave. He was going to break a few ships off from his from the fleet and form a temporary task force, which is called Task Force 34, that he would leave to guard the entrance of the San Bernardino Straits in case the Japanese happened to still be in the area and break through. But Halsey had discussed it, but he never really enacted it. But Nimitz didn't know that, so this is where the famous radio message comes. Where the hell is Task Force 34? And they had these nonsense phrases attached to the front and the back of each message to throw off Japanese decoders if they intercepted the signal. And the first phrase was, the first phrase was "Turkey trots to water." The following phrase was "The world wondered." It's from a Tennyson poem, or Kipling poem, sorry. And the decoder aboard New Jersey, which was Halsey's flagship, got the message. and stripped off the turkey trots to water, but gave Halsey a message that said, "Where is Task Force 34? Repeat, where is Task Force 34? The world wonders." And Halsey read that as being sarcastic by Nimitz and lost his temper and threw his cap down and everything. But the point is that the Japanese surprised the Americans with numerical superiority. So as soon as Sprague got as many aircraft off the deck as was feasible, the carriers started running to the southwest, try and open the distance between the pursuing Japanese and his carriers. Now, Taffy 3 was 6 of these carriers ringed with destroyer and destroyer escorts, the small boys. And it took a while for Sprague to get his shit together, so to speak, and come up with a plan of defense. But Evans aboard Johnston, as soon as he saw the first shell splashes, Johnston went to GQ and turned around and headed directly for the first threat, which was the line of fast cruisers that were, oh gosh, this is where being an old man in your memory. Kumano was the lead ship, followed by Suzuya. And so he headed straight for Kumano, dodging shell splashes all the way in. I mean, he didn't wait for orders. He'd seen the enemy and identified the nearest and most emergent threat and headed right for it. He got within the torpedo range for Kumano. His biggest worry, and he and Hagen had discussed this, to Evans, the worst insult would be to sink before they got off their most powerful weapon, the torpedoes, 10 torpedoes carried by these Fletchers. The Fletcher class destroyer this has got to have been the pinnacle of destroyer design. They had the depth charges for submarines. They had anti-aircraft guns for the aircraft threat, and then they had torpedoes for surface threat or surface submarines threat, whatever. In this situation, Evans considered the torpedoes his most valuable weapon, and he needed to get in there and get them off before the Japanese sank him. And he evidently was convinced that they were going to sink him, because when he got within range of Kumano, he fired all 10 in one salvo. That's a little bit overkill.
Yeah.
But again, I think it's because he expected not to live long. He did not expect to live through that engagement, because he was a sole destroyer going against this line of Japanese cruisers. He was outgunned. I mean, and he was getting within range of Yamato. Yamato's number one turret, and I'm talking about the turret, the guns, the ammunition below it, the whole assembly on which this rotated. Yamato's number one turret weighed more than Johnston, the ship. And that's what he was going against. So he fired his torpedoes and turned, and aboard Yamato, Kurata saw this cruiser. Now, if you see a destroyer in front of a Jeep carrier, but you think the Jeep carrier is a full-fledged Essex class fleet carrier, then that destroyer looks bigger, cruiser size. So Yamato's battle diary talks about this cruiser coming in that she took under fire, and she fired her main armament, 18-inch guns, a salvo of 3 shells, and her secondary armament, which is 6.1-inch salvo of 3, at this cruiser and hit her. All 3 of the 18-inch shells hit Johnston around midships and immediately took out. A Fletcher class has 2 fire rooms and 2 engine rooms. You have a forward one and an after one. And so the 3 18-inch shells took out the after fire room and the after engine room and immediately cut power to Johnston. Her main electrical switchboard was tied into the after rooms. So it took out the electrical power in the ship at the same time. And then the 6-inch shells, one of them went into the forward port 40 millimeter gun tub. One hit on the bridge right in the middle of a group of officers standing around Commander Evans. And then the third one, not so sure where that one went. It could have hit the, according to the wreck, it could have hit the starboard side bridge wing back aft. This is the port side bridge wing. You're looking at the area here where Evans was standing with a group of officers. The interesting thing here is there's no shrapnel damage on the pilot house next to him, which makes me wonder exactly where the shell exploded. I happen to think that it actually exploded underneath the bridge wing, and it was the shrapnel that came upward that wounded Evans and killed a couple of guys near him, and also wounded that little device standing in front of the porthole of the pilot house there. That's a 40 millimeter director for the gun tub down below, and you can see the damage to the gun tub down below. Yeah, there's the gun tub. You can see a big chunk missing out of the tub, and the 40 millimeter gun itself is just a mangled piece of steel. But up on the bridge wing, you'll see the director. The guy at that director was pretty gravely wounded. He did survive, and he actually stumbled into the pilot house and collapsed on the starboard side of a wall of the pilot house. But anyway, those shells hit Johnston and momentarily took her out of action. And at that moment, a rain squall came over Johnston and hit her. And so she had a precious few moments to restore electrical power by shifting the main electrical switchboard to the forward engine room and get that going. She had temporarily lost steering, so she manned the emergency steering. She came out of the rain squall, and she's head-to-head with battleship Harana, which was one of the Congo class. And her steering went out again temporarily, but she was on a course headed directly toward Harana. And so she and Harana exchanged shells, Johnston's 5-inch versus Harana's 14-inch shells. Harana scored no hits. Johnston scored a couple of hits in Harana's superstructure, but evidently didn't do any damage. And then another rain squall came, and steering was regained, and so Johnston and Harana split apart. So then Johnston is now crippled. She's on one engine, can only do half speed. She has no torpedoes left. She's left her escort station for the carriers unguarded. So she starts to head back toward her station, toward fleeing Taffy 3 formation. At about that time, a call came over the radio from Admiral Sprague to the small boys, ordering them to go in a torpedo attack against the Japanese. And Evans, his first impulse was to turn around and go back into battle. He could act as a shell sponge or a distraction for the Japanese to kind of give the other attacking destroyers a chance. And this is where, the history kind of diverges from what I get from Rob Hagen. Rob Hagen was up in the Mark 37 director atop the pilot house that directed the 5-inch guns of Johnston. And he noticed that the ship was turning when when his guns that were locked and director is synced up with the guns, it hit its stops. And he's, oh shit, what are we doing? So he gets out and goes down to the bridge and talks to Evans and says, what are you doing? He says, I'm going to go in. And Hagen argued with Evans and said, no, that's not a good idea. I know what you're trying to do, but if they're going in, there's nobody left protecting the carriers. You need to head back toward the carriers. So Evans belayed his turn and again went to proceed to join. She never joined the melee that would happen when the two Fletcher-class destroyers, Harriman and Hull, and the destroyer escort, Samuel B. Roberts, went in for a torpedo attack to disrupt the Japanese formation. And that was literally a melee, which ended up with Harriman severely damaged and flooded by the head. She had to limp her way back to the formation. Hull would never return. She got the crap beat out of her by Congo, and she would sink. And of course, Samuel B. Roberts would also get into a battle. She would get close up to the Japanese cruisers, and she was so small that they couldn't depress their main armament down low enough to hit her. But eventually they did. Congo again got a very telling hit on Samuel B. Roberts that almost tore her in half on the surface, and we would see the effect of that later on the wreck. And Johnston was trying to regain the formation, but on her way there, Evans saw some of the other cruisers, Tonei, Chickamauga, attacking the Gambier Bay, one of the jeep carriers that was in had the unlucky fortune to be in the northeastern quadrant of this fleeing formation, and they were concentrating their fire on her. So Evans ordered Johnston into the battle, and they took Tonei under fire, and which later shifted to Chickamauga, but neither one of them responded to Johnston's threat. They just kept concentrating on Gambier Bay, and so would Yamato, and eventually sink Gambier Bay. There's smoke, there's passing storm squalls, and as Johnston got close to the carrier formation, all of a sudden, out of the combination of smoke and squalls, these destroyers had smoke generators on their sterns, and they were putting out all kinds of clouds of white smoke, and they're enriching their fuel to pour black smoke out of their funnels. There's smoke everywhere. There's rain intermittently, and here comes Harriman out of all of that, and both Harriman and Johnston had to go full astern to avoid crashing into each other. Wow. So they backed off, and Harriman resumed her station. But at this point, Evans sees another threat building, and those destroyers that were ranging out to the west. They're setting up for torpedo runs, and they're in a good position to intercept because they had ranged out to the west, and Taffy 3 was fleeing to the southwest. They were setting up for torpedo runs. So Johnston goes straight at that formation, his one crippled destroyer against 11 destroyers with 2 light cruisers leading, and he starts taking them under fire. And he basically throws off the Japanese solution, and all of a sudden the Japanese turn away, and Evans goes, well, now I've seen everything. And he was overjoyed. But what had happened at that point, and this is a controversial part of the history of Battle off Samar, Admiral Kurita of the Center Force looked at the situation and gave a general recall. And after the first couple of launches from these destroyers that missed due to Johnston's interference, the destroyers broke off the attack, but they didn't immediately go back to wherever the formation was going to reform again. They've got this American destroyer in their midst, and so they start to circle around Johnston. And about this time, Congo, which had been firing at Johnston throughout a lot of the battle, and who was firing, because the battleships had dye in their shells. Congo had red dye in her shells, and we have a lot of reports early in the battle of red shell splashes near Johnston, but they never really hit her. Just the red shells. Haruna picked on Hull because they saw this lime green color that some of on board the Hull thought was a gas attack. But right there at the end, Suzuya finally got the range on Johnston and put a shell into her forward magazine and took out Mount 51. One of the other Japanese destroyers got around right directly into Mount 52 and took that one out. So now 51 and 52 are disabled. 54 had lost communication with the director after Yamato's hits, and she'd been acting independently and local the whole time without any benefit from the director. And 53 and 55 were firing the whole time. But finally, a couple of shells from Congo hit Johnston and took out her forward engine room. And now she's dead in the water. And now the Japanese destroyers start circling. And then they're just pumping shells into Johnston, just basically trying to get her to go under. And so Johnston starts to abandon ship. And going back to the recall, a lot of Japanese and American historians have questioned why Kurota gave up so easily, in their words. I don't share that feeling. What happened was Kurota's orders were to break through the San Bernardino Strait and make our way down to Leyte Gulf and fire on the invasion force ashore. On her way to do that, she encountered these kind of backwater American support units, and they proved to be more troublesome than expected. A lot of ammunition was expended on these targets, and a lot of fuel was expended. The Japanese didn't bring resupply with them. And Kurota probably, and also the air threat was starting to intensify. A lot of the airplanes launched from Taffy 3 and from some of the other Taffys in the area were landing on some of the new airstrips that were still being fought over at Leyte Gulf and getting resupplied. And other air assets were coming in. And they knew Halsey's fleet would come back at some point. And Kurota basically saw that his mission was a bust. You know, so much of his supply had been depleted and he had no resupply. So literally it was a logistics problem. You know, they do say that it's not battles that wins wars, it's logistics. And it's no more apparent than in this case. So that's how I attribute Kurota's decision, and I think it was wise. The Japanese surface fleet was still potent, and Kurota probably felt it would be better to preserve what he had to fight another day than to lose it to lose it needlessly here. And it's kind of ironic because if Kurota had pressed forward, if he had continued on to Leyte Gulf, you still had the Third Fleet assets down there. Now, they had used up a lot of their ammunition on the Surigao Strait, but you'd also have Halsey's Third Fleet returning. And they would have been, the Japanese would have been annihilated. The center force would have been absolute, it would have been the end of it. There would have been no Tengo for Yamato. She would have died off of Leyte Gulf. So, in effect, Johnston played spoiler. I mean, she was one destroyer against a massive fleet, and she was damaged from the outset and working at half capacity. Yet she always seemed to be where the Japanese were, spoiling their plans. In the initial attack, Evans had stalled the cruiser line. When he blew the bow off Kumano, Suzuya pulled alongside to assist Kumano and basically stalled the fast cruiser line, which was the most immediate threat to Taffy 3, buying them time to get away. He couldn't do much to save Gambier Bay, but he did fire on the other cruisers, Tone and Chikama, that were going in, and then he disrupted the destroyer attack. So every attack that really threatened the Taffy 3, Johnston was there to act as spoiler, and in so doing, convinced Kurota that he wasted too much of his supply to proceed with the mission and aborted, and thereby saving literally thousands of Japanese lives. So I don't. It's a dubious honor for Evans, who was defending his shipmates, from the Japanese, but he also saved the Japanese from themselves. So there's that aspect, which I kind of hit on when I'm talking to my Japanese counterparts, who respect Johnston, by the way, and it's funny that after Johnston was sunk, after she rolled over and sank, a Japanese destroyer came through the swimmers in the water, the survivors in the water. And at first, the Americans thought that the Japanese were there to kill them all. But this ship, which nobody knew the name of, because the Japanese during peacetime had the ship names painted on the side, but they were in the the Japanese script, the kana, and in wartime they painted over that, so there was no identifying features of the ship. But the commander of the ship, well, one of the forward gunners started to fire his guns, and the commander quickly shut that down. And the crew lined the rails, and they saluted the Johnston swimmers in the water, and even threw them a couple of cans. I think a can of tomatoes that came from the USA.
I believe it was Arkansas. I think they were canned in Arkansas, if I remember.
Yeah,
right.
I think you're right. I didn't know the identity of the ship. American historians didn't know the name of the ship. And then one day I was looking at some fan-made anime from Kantai Collection, Kankali, which is a Japanese. It started as a role-playing game where you fight naval battles, but instead of having like CG representation of ships, they're basically anime girls that have inherited the spirits of warships from the past. And in one of these fanfics, I saw a character that I knew as Yukikaze saluting a character that was Johnston in the water. And with that name, I went into the Japanese records and found that something that the Japanese already knew, that ship that had saluted the men in the water was Yukikaze. And the skipper at the time was both vilified and revered by the Japanese. Some Japanese appreciated the fact that the captain of Yukikaze had extended respect to a worthy opponent. They definitely considered Johnston a worthy opponent. Then there were others who vilified him, saying, "How dare you salute one of the foreign devils?" You know, and I've seen depictions of both, which is very interesting. And as Kankali has grown in popularity, originally it just all the characters were Japanese ships, and that game has proved so popular that it's become an anime. There's been a couple of movies made of it. They've started extending the characters to other nationalities like American, and Johnston is one of the first ones that they accepted because the Japanese really respect the fight that Johnston put up in that battle. So what else can I tell you?
There's the saluting thing. I remembered that because that is one part of the story that really resonated with me, the respect of it. But to your points about what kind of man Ernest Evans was, I also remember reading during the battle, he lost a couple of fingers on a hand.
Yes, that was during that first salvo from Yamato where he got wounded. His uniform was blown off of him. He was peppered with shrapnel. He lost 2 fingers in the left hand. When the medics came, he said, "No, you treat the really wounded," and he fought the whole battle that way. Later in the battle, when some of the 40 millimeter magazines up forward started cooking off and creating a fire that basically drove everybody off the bridge, he would go down and go back aft to that scuttle that we pointed to earlier, and he would shout down to the emergency steering commands. And the whole time he was doing that, he was standing in front of Mount 55, which, faces aft, and 55 was firing, and the mount captain on 55 saw that with each muzzle blast from 55, it was burning Evans's back, and he said, "Skipper, I gotta, I'm gonna have to stop firing." And Evans told him, "Forget about me. You find a target, you fire at it." And so 55 kept firing over Evans. You see how distant they are. That's how powerful that 5-inch blast is, and a very reduced version of that, just a pound of charge, is what took 3 fingers off my ship superintendent's right hand in an accident aboard Kidd.
So 55 is here. You said she's firing aft, and Evans is further back.
He's standing
right here.
Right there. Yes.
Okay.
And that muzzle blast is scorching him.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, Evans was in the current parlance. He was based.
Yeah. I mean, geez.
Yeah.
That's what do you say to that,
Yeah. I have the utmost respect for him. And maybe that's part of why I felt the emotion at the wreck, because I knew all this. And then I was seeing the stage for the battle right there. Like I said, the ship, the wreck looks like she hit the ocean floor yesterday. It's not like Titanic, which is in the intersection of the warm Gulf Coast and the cold Labrador Current. There's a lot of biological activity there that can survive at 3,800 meters. But at 6,500 meters in the Philippine Sea, there is no biologic activity. I didn't see, well, there's some, but I didn't see much down there. What corrosion I saw on the ship was where she burned during the battle. You've seen the pictures of her hold number on the starboard bow. that looks like it was painted yesterday. That particular part of the ship was not damaged or burned during the battle. So so to basically have the ship just as she appeared at the end of the battle, and knowing what happened, I think at least in part, help make the difference for me emotionally.
Gotcha.
And like I said, when I go aboard Kidd today, I see both ships. I will walk past a place where I knew that guy sat down during the battle, and he had his back to a ventilator exhaust, and then the shell from Congo went into the forward boiler room and blew out through that vent and just basically melted the flesh off that guy's back.
Jeez.
I could see right where that happened. And I have examples like this all around the ship. So yes, Johnston and now Kidd are very personal to me.
And of course, Kidd with her own instance with the kamikaze attack.
Yes. Well, and the thing about that is we know the identity of the kamikaze. Most kamikazes died in anonymity. But thanks to the efforts of a Japanese American lawyer from San Diego who came to Baton Rouge one day on some other mission is what I was going to say. Not really a mission, for some other task, whatever.
Yeah.
He came to the Kidd Museum, and he saw the display that we had of the remnants of the Zero that went into the Kidd, and he was inspired to try and find out who the pilot was. And he did research here. He did research in Japan. And through a process of elimination and an analysis of the radio calls, he was able to narrow down to the identity of the pilot. And so for many years, the Kidd Museum could not discuss that pilot because they still had surviving crew members from that day, and it was too painful for them. But about the time that I arrived at the museum, the final crewman basically aged out. He hadn't died just yet, but they were no longer able to come to the museum. And he stated that once we're all gone, you need to tell the story of that boy because he didn't want to be here any more than we did.
Right.
And that's very true. So right now I'm pursuing, hopefully, since we know who he is, we know where he launched from, Kanoya Air Base, and we are investigating establishing a sister museum relationship with Kanoya Air Base so that we can tell both sides of that story.
That's amazing.
Kidd has become a bridge. We do have people, self-described patriots, who come into the museum and they don't want to see the kamikaze because they're patriots. They don't want to hear about the Japanese. But Japan was their enemy in 1945 when the kamikaze hit. But she's our staunch ally in the Pacific today.
Sure.
And I think Kidd, who once fought off Japanese attackers, can now act as a bridge between our two countries and help us to draw together with our shared stories. And it's my mission as executive director of the museum to try and make that happen as much as I can.
Well, and you're telling the complete story as well.
Well, yes, of course. Like I said, today we're finding out that that we actually like each other, Japanese and Americans. There was a thing a while ago, about a month ago or so, called the Japanese Twitter Weekend, and on that weekend, there was an explosion of messages between Japanese Americans on X, using X's algorithm that allowed you to do real-time translation of Japanese into English, English into Japanese. And for the first time, people that don't speak the other languages were talking to each other in near real time. And it was amazing the fascination that the Japanese had with American culture and vice versa. And so it really showed that we have a lot in common with each other. And don't you dare run into my air search radar.
No,
yeah.
I promise you, I wasn't doing that.
Okay. And so Kidd can be a bridge, where one-time enemies, now allies, can share.
Absolutely.
We've had bald eagles looking out over Kidd while she's been down in the Houma shipyard. There was a bald eagle I've got a picture of atop that air search radar, looking out over the ship. When we put her back in the water, at least 2 bald eagles circled the Kidd the whole time. And when we brought her up the navigation canal into Houma, there was a bald eagle that sat down on a post near one of the movable bridges to watch Kidd as she went by. So doesn't get much more American than that.
Absolutely. And I think, and I could be wrong on this, but I think one of the times that you guys did the Kamikaze remembrance ceremony on board the ship, Tim snapped a picture of a bald eagle that was up on that mast on that day, if I remember correctly. I wish he was here so he could tell us, but I think I got that right.
Could be. I've been collecting the pictures that various people have taken in the shipyard with bald eagles in them. Unfortunately, I don't have the ownership of each marked down. I should probably do that, especially if I use those pictures elsewhere.
Absolutely.
But I'm sharing them online anyway, because it's America.
Well, and you guys are welcome to any footage and photos I have, anytime. Just say the word.
Well, these are all great. The ones that you showed from your drone today is where Kidd is sitting right now. She was supposed to come home, but the river levels are low in this drought year. They never reached high enough to bring her to put her back into her cradle. I mean, we could tow her to Baton Rouge, but we can't put her anywhere. So she's still in Houma. She's in the repair yard. She was put back in the water from dry dock in November of last year on Veterans Day. And the shipyard has had to kind of scooch her into a kind of an out-of-way place. What you saw there, she's wedged in between a barge and the shoreline. She's tied to an excavator and a couple of anchors that are buried in the bit of land that's over there. So she's not in a very glorious place right now. For anybody interested in visiting her in the shipyard, that's not going to happen. The shipyard is a secure facility. They do some government work, and it's costing them money. So don't go knocking on the doors at Thomas C. and Houma and asking to see the ship. They're not going to let you. We can't work access to the ship. So she may be sitting by herself for, until hopefully no later than spring of next year, when we anticipate the waters to rise again.
Absolutely. Well, on that note, is there anything you guys are doing at the museum, the building itself? How are things there right now? You got anything coming up? Any events?
Well, Kidd was our main attraction, and when she left, we lost over 90% of our attendance. Even though the Kidd is a state asset, we don't get funding from the state usually. Kidd was given to the state of Louisiana by the U.S. Navy, and the museum was founded under the premise that we would be self-sustaining, that we would not depend upon government funding to operate. And that's, and Kidd is usually a draw. We've been the #1 non-sports attraction in Baton Rouge for many years. Obviously, LSU and the Tigers are going to blow us away every instance. But if you take that out of the equation, we're #1. But without the Kidd, even though we have a museum with exhibits and we're open 7 days a week, we just don't have the attendance. We just don't have the draw. So we had to ask for money from the state when we couldn't get the ship back this year, just to keep the doors open and to maintain a core staff. I had to let half of the staff go when the ship left. And what I have remaining are the essential personnel who took everything off the ship, and we need them to put everything back on the ship when she gets back. And even then, it's going to be a challenge because we got minimal funding. So I don't have any money to do anything events wise. I don't have any money to improve on the exhibits, although I took all my Kobe models and got them out of the house and made an exhibit for them at the museum, which my wife loved because I got them out of the house. Although don't tell her, I've bought them again and built a few of them, my favorite ones. So we want people to come to the museum. I'm not trying to scare anybody away. We still have exhibits. We still have the P-40 in our courtyard, the A-7 out there. We have our Hall of Honor, which tells the stories of Louisianans who fought in the wars. Then we have a Memorial Plaza, which is considered sacred ground by the state. It has the names of every Louisianan who died in America's wars, gave their lives for that. Trying to start an education component at the museum, but I'm challenged by lack of budget right now. Trying to work on some education funds to get that going. I'm probably going to do a Titanic exhibit because I can film 10 minutes of me talking about and showing some Titanic wreck footage. There is a model of Titanic that was in the archives when I got there. It had no reason to be out because it doesn't tie to the mission of the museum, but everybody loves Titanic, so it doesn't cost me anything to get that out on the floor, get a monitor, and have a short film. So I'm working on that right now. I've got some permission to use some footage, and that'll be a cheap exhibit that should have some draw.
Sure.
But other than that, we're really looking for. We're doing some restoration work in a warehouse that we have leased. That has now gone past the lease, and we're allowed to stay there until the ship comes back, or at least till later this year. And so we're doing some restoration work over there, but everything's low key right now. But the museum still has stories to tell, so I would like to have people to continue coming to the museum. And of course, donations help with all this. Either individual donations that help us with our operating expenses. Nobody's getting rich at this museum, I guarantee you, myself included. So everything that's donated goes toward either the restoration effort or to get the artifacts ready to go back aboard the ship, or to keep the museum open. We're going after some high-end donors to try and improve upon that situation. But everything costs money, and the world of the nonprofit museum business is very difficult. It's the most difficult job I've had in my entire career, but it's also the most rewarding. This is my last job, and I'm glad I took it. I'm going to look back on this a job with more pride than on just about anything else I've ever done.
Well said. And to your point about the, if anybody wants to make donations, we've got the website up right there, usskid.com. Super chats on live YouTube streams are also essentially donations to the museum, which one of our guys, Mark, shout out to Mark. I did not forget about you. He made some super chats both to my channel and the kids. So Mark, thank you so much for that. And you mentioned Kobe models. I believe you guys are going to be selling the Kobe USS Kidd at the museum when it becomes available.
It should be out next month.
All right.
Yes, I'm a Kobe builder. In here, after I donated my Yamato and Akagi and Titanic and Belfast and Arizona to the museum, I've got them here to build again.
Right.
And so I was very interested in striking up a collaboration with Kobe, and World of Warships helped to make that collaboration happen. And as a result, we do have a USS Kidd model coming out in Kobe bricks, and she looks good. And I will encourage everybody to go to Kobe.com and buy one next month when they come out.
I'm going to try and steer everyone towards your museum and buy it from there.
Well, okay. If we have them in stock, we're only ordering 12 to begin with. Again, I have no money. And even though we collaborate with Kobe, we still have our cost that for these kits. And I expect they're going to sell. I'm buying 3 of them myself.
Well,
So,
one of them for sure is right here. You know,
well, there's 4. There's 4.
Yeah. So as
staff,
soon as Tim gives me the word, that Saturday or Sunday, you know, as soon as I can get out there, I'm getting it.
We're going to see. Yeah, we're going to see how long they last, and maybe convince Kobe to do more than their first run of these. Hopefully, this will become a permanent one for them, and they'll just keep producing them, and we'll sell them to the store. HMS Belfast in London, Kobe collaborated with them, and the Belfast. I got my Belfast model in London. Then I donated to the Kidd, and I had to order another one so I could have it here. So they've been making the Belfast one for a while. So I'm hoping they'll do the same with Kidd.
Right. Well, Parks, thank you so much for coming on and sharing all your information about the Johnston and, you know, diving to the wreck. I mean, that was an incredible presentation. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you. And I didn't give you all the bits because I do have a book I want to write, and I want to save some for the book.
Sure.
So anyway, I'll let you know when that comes out. But I gotta finish my job here at Kidd first. I got to get her home. It appears that my reason, and I've come to believe this sincerely, everything happens for a reason. I was meant to find Johnston. I was meant to come here at Kidd, and I'm starting to appreciate the fact that I was meant to be the executive director to get her into and out of dry dock. My predecessor, she was very good with finances. She got the museum through COVID, and I think that was her purpose. Mine is to get the ship back, and I hope that she comes back before I have to leave, so I can complete that cycle. But that's what I'm going to be looking back on. So, and because of that, I've got my patch here. This was done by Hank Porter, Disney artist, in 1945. It's the Busy Beaver, and he's busy for the Ship Construction, Repair, and Maintenance Division. So I've got this patch sewed onto my jacket. That's going to define my time here. So
I dig it. All right. Well, I think that about covers it for us, unless you got anything else you want to add to it.
Oh, I've taken up enough of your time, and my wife is waiting for me for dinner. So
sounds like a plan. Well, let's not keep Mrs. Stephenson waiting.
Nope. Okay, well, thank you for having me on, James.
Yeah, of course. My pleasure. Thanks for coming on and again, sharing all your knowledge about this ship with us.
Okay. And I will see you either when you come to the museum or next time I'm in Homa.
Yeah, absolutely.
And at this point, we'll put a shout out for Abear's Cafe in Homa, the preferred
There you
lunch
go.
spot for USS Kidd crew members going down to the shipyard.
Absolutely. All right, everybody. Well, we thank you all so much for tuning in. Whether you're on my channel or the kids' channel, we appreciate you guys so much. Because remember, even just sitting here watching, you are essentially giving free money to the museum because the museum's YouTube channel is monetized and they get ad revenue. So like
thank
and
you.
subscribe. Yes.
Thank
Like
you
and
for hanging.
subscribe. Put the playlist on repeat. Keep them playing. And that's it. Everyone have a great weekend. Thank you guys so much again, as always, for attending. And we will see you the next time.